Hello and welcome. My name is Leah Kopke. I'm a 3D motion design freelancer, and this is my 3D modeling podcast, Ambient 3D Animations. Today we're going to go over the Boolean generator that has replaced the old bool generator. We're also going to go over the Boolean tag. So let's go ahead and jump into Cinema 4D and get started. So here we are inside Cinema 4D. There's a few places where you can find your Boolean. So let's go ahead and point those out. The first place is you can find it if you hold a click under here, you'll find your Boolean. You can also find it up here under the Create menu under Generator. If you go down, you can find Boolean right here underneath the spline mask that we covered last week. We can also find the Boolean using Shift-C, and by just typing Boolean into here. If we click on it, it'll add it to our object manager right there. We can also drag and drop it to our UI if we'd like to use it more than once and just have it on hand. And we'll go through the Boolean tag in just a moment. Going to close out of that by clicking away. And now we're going to need a few things to use the Boolean object with. So I'm going to add in a sphere, and I'm going to add in a couple platonics here. Holding a click here, just releasing it on these platonics, so now we have a bunch of stuff in here. Under our display, I'm going to turn on garage shading lines so that we can see what we're doing here. I'm also going to go over to filter and turn off the work plane so that it's easier for everyone to see what we're doing. So this is one of our platonics, this is another one of our platonics. I'm going to put the sphere and the Boolean and both platonics in here. So our Boolean right now has its operation set to union. Under the object tab, you'll see your object properties. Operation is the first one we're going through. And what this does is it combines all of these into one shape. So if I just were to decide I'm going to move these in here, it's going to combine them all into one shape, and you'll even be able to see that more if I turn on lines. You can see that this is all one form. They're no longer separated. And a cool hotkey to be aware of to turn on and off your Boolean is Q. So this works for any generator. So if you press Q, it turns it off, and you can actually now see that these shapes are not being combined into one. If I press Q again, it'll activate the Boolean, turn it on. You can check it on and off here. It does the same thing as Q. I'll turn back on our garage shading line so that we can go through some more of these options here. We have subtract. And yes, this does work with more than one object. We also have intersect. And since all three aren't intersecting, you won't see too much happening. So let's go back to union. And I'm just going to move this platonic over here. Maybe there. And now hopefully when we choose intersect, actually I'm just going to use these two for right now, because I think it'll be easier for you to see. So if I turn off the Boolean, that's how those two objects look right now. I'm hiding that other platonic. If I turn it back on, where these two Booleans intersect, you can see that that is where they intersect. And if you choose without, that makes a hole. So it's very similar to subtract, except with subtract, it fills it in. With the form of the other shape, it's like taking one shape out of the other, but without just removes it completely and leaves it with a hole. Now there are some troubleshooting things I'd like to go through here. So I'm going to turn back on our platonic and I'm going to put it within this hierarchy. So the order of operations is very important here, and where you place things within the hierarchy. So we're going to talk about that for a moment. The sphere is first in the hierarchy. So that means that this is what is going to have the subtractions happening to. So the platonics below it are going to be subtracting from whatever's top in the hierarchy. If I were to decide I want to put a different one of these top in the hierarchy, you'll see the reverse is happening. I'm going to put this back down here. Now these operations are actually working pretty decent right now. Within the hierarchy, you could also decide I want this platonic to be within the hierarchy of this platonic. And right now it's working. So this is good. And the reason why this is working is right now we have resolve self-intersections on within our Boolean. So if this is unchecked, it's going to run into some errors. Now basically what this resolve self-intersections is doing is it's telling Cinema 4D for this in this hierarchy, first add these up as one object, then subtract them. And then it has an easier time calculating that versus the platonic being subtracted from the sphere and then subtracting this platonic from the sphere. First it's adding these up and then subtracting them together. So that's the difference. And going to uncheck this here for a moment because I want to see if I can kind of show this in a little bit of a different way. So you can also see that now since these two platonics aren't overlapping and I still don't have resolve self-intersections on, it's still doing a little bit of a weird thing here. So if you're seeing an error like that, checking that on will correct it, and then you'll get a clean hole between these two because it'll be running the operations in the right order of what gets subtracted from what first, basically. So that's how to troubleshoot that, is remember that resolve self-intersections option. I'm going to, for just a moment, change this to just garage shading. And I'm going to try to find some errors in here in the shading. So if we look really closely at this, you'll see that the shading here isn't perfectly even. Hopefully you can see that on my screen. It's one of those things that is really subtle that you might only see if you really zoom in on an object and look closely. And Cinema 4D uses this thing called Phong shading, and that's what this Phong tag controls. I'll leave an episode going through Phong and what it is and how it works and all these cool settings in here. Leave a link to that episode in the description in case if you want to learn all about it. But basically, this is what's being used to control the shading on your object. So your Phong angle is dependent on the angle between the normals of the polygons. I'll talk a little bit more about that. I'll also leave a link to an episode on normals in case if you'd like to learn all the nerdy things about that. I'll just go over it briefly here. If I increase this Phong angle, you can see that This is becoming more and more rounded out. It looks more and more rounded out. If I reduce this Phong angle, you can see the individual facets on the sphere. So the really cool thing about this is that you can see that when we cut out one shape from another, even when we crank this up, sometimes it just isn't looking 100% right. Like, can you see that there's like a slight edge here, just from how these are cut out and how it's calculating? Also, when one of these forms is cut out from another, oh, you can see one really easily right here. When one of these shapes is cut out from another, something that happens is that sometimes it'll create n-gons or triangles, which will also screw up the shading on your object. So one way to fix that is by choosing this option here, high quality normals. So you can see that edge went away when I turned this on. So that's basically what this is doing. If you leave this off, something important to know is that if I were to delete these other Phongs, Phong tags, this one on the first object in the hierarchy, that's controlling the settings for all of these shapes. So this is what's controlling it, is whatever Phong tag is on the first object in your hierarchy. You can override that with this high quality normals, and it'll smooth things out. So that's something to be aware of. One of the errors you can run into is that shading, and that's how to fix it. There are more settings in here. We've got selections. So in our Boolean, you can choose this intersect edges option, and you'll see that I'll add this tag up here. And you can actually use this tag in order to drive something like a bevel deformer. Here, where's our bevel deformer? I usually bevel things by hand. Okay, so here's our bevel deformer, but today we're using this guy here. And you can see that if I just want to bevel, I'm actually going to increase this a little bit, add in some subdivisions, and then I'm going to drag and drop our selection tag in here. I'm going to reduce this a little bit. So you can see some wacky stuff is happening. So let's talk a little bit about what error we're running into now. So, and here the high quality normals work best when you aren't beveling anything. If you're beveling something, it's really best to just keep that off, and you'll see it looks better. And then I'm going to increase our offset just a little bit. Let's go with 2 centimeters. And you can increase the number of subdivisions. If I turn on our lines, you can see this is being subdivided. As you can see, this is being subdivided 4 times because that's what I have in here. I'm sorry, my voice is coming and going lately. And our selection I is being pulled from here. So I dragged and dropped this in here, and that's just where those intersections are happening. It's telling C4D to bevel it. If I were to remove the selection, it'll just start beveling all the edges that are within this angle threshold. So you can control how many edges are being beveled based on this angle threshold, or you can even use a selection like this one here. Let's talk a little bit about using a plane. So I'm just going to remove this bevel for right now, because I'd like to talk about the fact that now you can use surfaces in order to create a bool. So I'm going to put this in here. And make sure it's in the right part of the hierarchy. So you can see that we have this plane in here. And it is basically slicing this. Now it won't work properly if the plane isn't going all the way through the object. So just make sure that your plane is going all the way through the object. What controls the direction in which this is being sliced is actually the normals of the plane. So for a moment, I'm going to use our handy dandy hotkey Q. And I'm just going to move this plane out here. I'm going to hit C to make it editable. And I talked about how we were going to talk about normal directions. So each one of these polygons has a normal direction. Every single point has a normal direction. And you'll notice with the polygons, the right side of the surface, if you select it, it will always be orange. While in polygon mode, on the back side of the surface, they'll be purple, so they can easily see which way is which. And this is used for calculations. It's used for calculating Phong and the angle between the polygons. And it uses that angle between the two normal directions in order to calculate at what point they're being smoothed out and such with the Phong, but they're also used for 3D modeling operations like this. So what you'll notice is that this orange side is determining which direction this will cut. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn back on our Boolean for a little bit. I'm going to move this on through here. Okay, so right now you can see it's being sliced like that. I'm going to press Q again. This time, I'm going to go back into polygon mode, click away, so we can start a new selection. I'm going to use the hotkey UF, and you can see it here. UF under F is fill selection, so we can just fill in that entire group of polygons and select them all at once. And then I'm going to right click on them and choose reverse normals. And now they're all purple on that side. I'm going to press Q. And now you can see that the direction they're being sliced is reversed. So it's really important to make sure that your normals are working correct while you're slicing things with surfaces or planes or anything like that, in order to have these calculations work out appropriately. So that's one thing important to keep in mind. And I'll also leave a link to the episode about normals in case if you want to understand those more. So no worries if you're like, Leah, what are you talking about here? I explain in greater depth in another video. Now you'll also see that we have this option union, and we can use that with this, but it doesn't look quite right. So if you want the union to work correctly with a surface, like a plane, it'll work better if you add in a thicken generator. So we have the thicken generator right over here. And I'm going to drop the plane in here. Now it's adding thickness to that plane, so now they're able to create a union of all these forms. You really need closed forms in order for the union to create a closed form. And so I want to make sure to point that out. Under the Boolean, we've covered all of these options. Now there are additional options here. If I right-click on an object in our hierarchy, go down to modeling tags, you'll see the Boolean tag. Now the Boolean tag comes with a lot of the same options as the Boolean, but you can choose these on an object-by-object basis. So I can choose to have this plain be controlled with a union. I can choose to use subtract. And now you can see that we are subtracting. If I want it to subtract from everything, I'll need to move this to a different part of the hierarchy. There we go. So now this is why the order of operations is important from that. So the order of operations changes how this looks. So when this is at the bottom, this is the order of operations. If I move this up, it looks a little bit different. Something else cool that comes with these is that you can also make polygon selections, and then you'll see that it'll add a polygon selection for the thicken right here. So you could use that for 3D modeling, similar to how we used the selected edges that we had saved in order to create those bevels. So that's super helpful. And one more thing that I'd like to go over, we're about to wrap this up, is that if you create a redshift material, I'm just going to make this green for right now so it's easy to see. You can apply these individually to the objects in here. So if I were to create another material, I'm going to make this one pink. Okay, so now our platonic's pink. But you can see that if I add this to the sphere, I can control the color of the sphere. I can control the color of this platonic. I can control the color of this platonic up here. So it's kind of cool how you can go through these and adjust the different materials for each. If I create another material and I make this one, let's say yellow. If I add this yellow material, you can see that I can add it to the Boolean, and now that cutout part in there is yellow. So there's a lot of different ways you can control in which this looks. It's a really cool tool, and you can even keyframe these options or the positions of these to animate them. And yeah, I hope you found this helpful and enjoyed learning about the Boolean generator as well as the Boolean tag. If you'd like to learn more 3D modeling tools inside of Cinema 4D, I've gone over most of the mesh tools, many other generators, and you can find all of them on my podcast, Ambient 3D Animations. I also have some fun 3D modeling tutorials that we've done and made some things together. So I hope you find that all helpful. And thank you so much. If you find this helpful, please hit like, please subscribe, and I hope to see you here next time.